Yeah, so as I said, thank you for accommodating me this way. I'm going to add to Olena's presentation relating to nuclear safety during armed conflict. And I hope that you will see the ways in which this ties together, and also get a glimpse of what will be in our publication. So I'm going to start off just briefly with the issue of terminology, and then I will proceed with looking a little bit at the African Nuclear Regulatory Framework, and to hopefully show how that ties in to the broader discussions we have here, and really the role of African states in creating lasting peace, but also in this very important task of kind of overhauling the multilateral system and making it more inclusive, making it more fair. From there, I will then look at international law and the protection it offers to nuclear installations. And then just briefly, in closing, I will look at the IAEA's, that is the International Atomic Energy Agency's, response to the occupation of nuclear power plants in Ukraine. So I'm starting off with this issue of terminology, and I'm relying on the IAEA's definitions here of nuclear safety and nuclear security to hopefully illustrate what is really at stake here, and how what has been happening in Ukraine, first with the occupation of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and then the escalating situation at Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, but also the other nuclear facilities that are at risk in Ukraine. So firstly, nuclear safety, the IAEA defines as the achievement of proper operating conditions, prevention of accidents, and mitigation of accident consequences, resulting in protection of workers, the public, and environment from undue radiation risks. And then nuclear security, the prevention and detection of and response to criminal or intentional unauthorized acts involving or directed at nuclear material, other radioactive material, associated facilities, or associated activities. And so here we really see a kind of threat and response situation, even in the IAEA's own reaction to this, coming directly from its definitions. So then a little bit of focus on the African Nuclear Regulatory Framework. So non-proliferation, safety, and security are all ideals that have been deeply embedded in this framework on the African continent. Many African states since independence, but also continuing right now, are strong supporters of the peaceful uses of nuclear science and technology, and recognize the significant contribution that it can make to achieving development goals. So the continent already supports several international regulatory frameworks related to nuclear safety and security, non-proliferation and disarmament. It is not limited to these, but these are some of the major ones. So the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT, only one African state is not a member state there. Then the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or the Nuclear Ban Treaty, the TPNW. We have 17 signatories and 16 ratifications. Then the CTBT, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. One has signed but not ratified, and another state not signed. Unfortunately, one of these states that have not ratified is part of the 44 listed in Annex 2 of the CTBT, which is keeping it from entering into force. But nevertheless, there is widespread support for the treaty on the continent. Then the IAEA's Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials, as well as its amendment. And then the various IAEA safeguards and other initiatives that has been implemented in close partnership with the continent. But then outside of this international framework, Africa has a robust homegrown nuclear regulatory framework and institutions that actually complement and in some cases surpass the international frameworks to which it belongs. So here I'll just briefly focus on AFRA, the FNRBA, and most importantly here, the Treaty of Pelindaba and established under the treaty the African Commission on Nuclear Energy, AFCON. My slides won't move. There we go. So AFRA, the African Regional Cooperation Agreement for Research, Training and Development related to nuclear science and technology. This agreement entered into force before the Pelindaba Treaty on the 4th of April 1990. Its aim is to support socioeconomic development on the continent through nuclear science and technology. If you hear background noise, that is my dog. I apologize. I just live in their world. They are in the room with me. And then the AFRA mission statement is to be the leading regional organization in Africa and a vehicle of member states for the effective promotion and coordination of peaceful applications of nuclear science and technology for socio-economic development on the African continent. AFRA is specifically mentioned in Article 8.3 of the Treaty of Pelindaba. This reads, parties are encouraged to make use of the program of assistance available in IAEA and in this connection to strengthen cooperation under the African Regional Cooperation Agreement for Research, Training and Development related to nuclear science and technology. And moving on to the Forum of Nuclear Regulatory Bodies in Africa, the FNRBA. This was established in 2009 and it actually forms part of the IAEA's Global Nuclear Security and Safety Network. It was established with the purpose to enhance, strengthen, and harmonize the radiation protection, nuclear safety, and security regulatory infrastructure and framework among its members. It has hosted several successful training workshops across the continent over many years, and it is active across 6 thematic areas: legislative and regulatory infrastructure, radiation and waste safety, nuclear safety infrastructure, emergency preparedness and response, transport safety infrastructure, and nuclear security infrastructure. And here we really see a kind of interplay between the legal and the practical. The FNRBA's 2021-2022 action plan was focused on overseeing the safety and security of radioactive material, the development of regulations for securing these sources, including a transport security exercise, FNRBA working group meetings, a regional workshop on a nuclear security culture, and a survey on the status of the radioactive material of FNRBA members. But then the framework I really want to draw your attention to is the African Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty, or as it is commonly known, the Treaty of Pelindaba. And there is a map on the left, which I've compiled to show the status of the Treaty of Pelindaba on the continent. And you will note that there's a total of 44 state parties and 52 signatory states, with one state having currently taken no action on the treaty. So the Treaty of Pelindaba opened for signature in 1996 and entered into force in 2009. And in many ways, the treaty is revolutionary, in part because it really emphasizes and brings to the fore the peaceful uses pillar of the Non-Proliferation Treaty of the NPT, but also because of Article 10 and 11, and this is really relevant in what we are discussing today, the threats of armed attack to nuclear installations. So Article 10 and Article 11 of the Treaty of Pelindaba. Article 10, which relates to the physical protection of nuclear materials and facilities. Article 10 states that each party undertakes to maintain the highest standards of security and effective physical protection of nuclear materials, facilities, and equipment to prevent theft or unauthorized use and handling. To that end, each party undertakes to apply measures of physical protection equivalent to those provided for in the Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and in recommendations and guidelines developed by the IAEA for that purpose. And I think that in itself is quite important because it really shows the respect for, adherence to, and value added to the international frameworks that are then worked in to the continental frameworks. And as you will see in Article 11, where it surpasses somewhat the prohibition of armed attack on nuclear installations. And this is what sets the Treaty of Pelindaba apart as exemplary. So under Article 11, each party undertakes not to take or assist or encourage any action aimed at an armed attack by conventional or other means against nuclear installations in the African nuclear weapon-free zone. So the Treaty of Pelindaba establishes the continent of Africa as a nuclear weapon-free zone, making it one of only 3 in the world. And under the Treaty of Pelindaba, it also established the African Commission on Nuclear Energy, which is headquartered in South Africa, and is tasked with ensuring that states adhere to their obligations under the treaty, but to also advance the peaceful uses of nuclear energy for development purposes. Then quickly looking at the international law and the protection of nuclear installations under international law. So at present, there are no international treaties that govern the protection of nuclear installations against armed attack like Pelindaba does. But that doesn't mean that nuclear installations are unprotected in international law. What we do have are 2 additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions of 1949, and we also have the rules of international humanitarian law. So we have customary law rather than treaty law. And precisely because there is no international treaty law on this, customary law carries more weight. And you can see there I've used this opportunity for a tiny bit of promotion. I did write a paper on legal protection for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, matters for nuclear installations everywhere, where this is discussed a little bit more. I would like to encourage you to read that. But you can see there where I've put the little glasses. I always do that for myself when I take notes, to draw your attention to it, to rule number 42 of the Rules of International Humanitarian Law, which states that particular care must be taken if works and installations containing dangerous forces, namely dams, dikes, and nuclear electrical generating stations, and other installations located at or in their vicinity are attacked in order to avoid the release of dangerous forces and consequent severe losses among the civilian population. And then I want to also draw your attention to Article 15 of Additional Protocol 2 to the Geneva Conventions and Article 56(1) of Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions, which states, works or installations containing dangerous forces, namely dams, dikes, and nuclear electrical generating stations, shall not be made the object of attack, even where these objects are military objectives, if such attack may cause the release of dangerous forces and consequent severe losses among the civilian population. Other military objectives located at or in the vicinity of these works or installations shall not be made the object of attack, if such attack may cause the release of dangerous forces from the works or installations and consequent severe losses among the civilian population. You will note that the language here becomes quite important, and many legal experts will argue that the phrase may cause becomes problematic and really open to interpretation. And it really becomes a matter then of in whose assessment. So that details one of the shortcomings of international law and enforcing international law. And then to just quickly look at the IAEA's response to the occupation of nuclear power plants in Ukraine. I cannot go into detail of exactly what that has entailed, but there are several long, very detailed reports on this published by the IAEA. But what we have seen since the initial occupation of Chernobyl on the 24th of Feb 2022 are several statements, emergency meetings, reports on the situation on the ground, both in Chernobyl and Zaporizhzhia, several safety and security inspections, often led by the Director General Rafael Grossi himself. We have seen, as Olena also mentioned, IAEA experts permanently stationed at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, as well as the other nuclear facilities in Ukraine, which, as the the Director General himself has reminded us, are also or could also be at risk, and they are there in a monitoring role. We have seen technical support and assistance from the IAEA, the delivery of critical equipment, briefings to the Security Council calling for an end to shelling near the plant, as well as briefings to the General Assembly. And then, importantly, but not yet in practice, although it has received widespread international support, is calls from the IAEA for the creation of a nuclear safety and security protection zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I just want to also highlight the statement from the IAEA's Director General on the situation at Zaporizhzhia, where he said that the situation is unprecedented. It is the first time a military conflict has occurred amid the facilities of a large established nuclear power program. A nuclear accident can have serious impacts within the country and beyond its borders. Indeed, that is true, but while this is the first time that we're seeing this in practice, the concern and the fear that this might happen has existed for a long time. And so I want to end this presentation by asking what more can be done. And I'm just going to give two suggestions here. And my first one is that we certainly need greater follow through and political will to do what is necessary. So as mentioned, the recognition that nuclear installations can be at risk during armed conflict has been well known for a number of years. And here I'd like to actually draw on an example from the IAEA itself, going back to Resolution 533 of October 1990 from the General Conference that year. It says, the General Conference, aware of the fact that an armed attack on a nuclear installation could result in radioactive releases with grave consequences within and beyond the boundaries of the state which has been attacked, convinced of the need to prohibit armed attacks on nuclear installations from which such releases could occur, and of the urgency of concluding an international agreement in this regard, and aware of the ongoing work of the Conference on Disarmament with a view to concluding an international agreement in this regard, one recognizes that attacks or threats of attack on nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes could jeopardize the development of nuclear energy. Two, considers that the safeguard system of the agency is a reliable means of verifying the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and then goes on to point number 7, where it urges all states to cooperate in achieving a successful resolution of the issue in the near future. And I think that now this is more pertinent than ever, and perhaps this is an opportunity for African states in its push for lasting peace to also bring about the agreement of an international treaty preventing the armed attack on nuclear installations. And then my second suggestion is that we should also recognize the limitations. Firstly, the IAEA has a very specific mandate in which it can operate, but it also often has to rely on the permission of member states. And as we'll see in the case of the occupation of Zaporizhzhia, Zaporizhzhia has been occupied by invading forces since the 4th of March 2022, and the IAEA only gained access on the 1st of September. So we need to also be realistic about what the agency can and cannot do. But then also we need to recognize that international law has limitations, and it's clear that there are issues with implementing international law. And I think Olena made a point about rules being tested. Although the Treaty of Pelindaba does have Article 11 that prohibits the armed attack, we've never had to see it exercised and to see how that would play out in practice. So I'm going to end it there, and I thank you all for your attention.